Hello and welcome to The Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely. With me today, of course, is co-founder of The Gaggle, Peter Lavelle. So, Peter, there was an interesting event, barely noted over the weekend. China's ambassador to France gave an interview on French television, and he said something very interesting. And let me just read out what he said. I mean, the newspaper reports are quite perfunctory, but nonetheless, it caused a bit of an explosion. He declared that that the former Soviet countries, that means the former republics of the USSR that have become independent states, the former Soviet countries have no, quote, effective status, unquote, in international law. Asked whether Crimea belongs to Ukraine, the Chinese ambassador said that, quote, it depends on how you perceive the problem, arguing that it was historically part of Russia and offered to Ukraine by former Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev. In international law, even those ex-Soviet Union countries do not have the status, the effective status in international law, because there is no international agreement to materialize their status as a sovereign country. Now, what he said here is, I mean, of course, there's been an absolute explosion among the Baltic republics, in Ukraine, the French ambassador, the French foreign ministry, blah, 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 blah. These countries have sought their freedom from oppression, blah, blah. Borrell has also weighed in. But he raises an issue that should have been raised many, many times over the past 30 years, since 1991, which was that the dissolution of the USSR was illegal. It was illegal by any measure at all. And let's just, the one key ingredient in all of this, sort of, whereby we can point as the key point of reference. That was the referendum that took place in March of 1991. This was a referendum mandated by the Congress of People's Deputies. Therefore, it was the legal legislative assembly of the USSR. It mandated this referendum and mandated it to be binding. It was to be binding, and there was to be no referendum for another 10 years on the subject. So therefore, whatever the outcome of that referendum, it was to be binding on the peoples of the USSR. And as we know, 80% of those who took part voted to maintain some kind of a union state, not even a confederation, a union state, a kind of a union or whatever, sovereign states. This was duly ignored by the unilateral independence of Ukraine following the abortive Soviet coup. So in the days in August, they went ahead, had no legal basis whatever for declaring independence. Even though they had a referendum, they had no legal basis to have a republic-wide referendum. There's nothing in the constitution of the USSR that allows you to have a republic-wide referendum. And then, of course, we have the Belovesh Accords, by which the three presidents of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus simply dissolved the Soviet Union. No basis whatsoever that three presidents, without any enabling legislation, without consultation with their legislatures, without the constitution of the USSR, without their own constitution, they could just simply unilaterally declare the USSR null and void. So this is absolutely right. I mean, that this should have been raised many, many times over. And, one could say, oh, well, but it's been accepted de facto. So what? A lot of the things are accepted de facto until they're not.
That's where we start disagreeing.
Until they're not. And so therefore, my view is this is something Russia should start addressing now and declaring what happened in 1991, given its illegality, given the fact that the minimum obligations that independent states have to fulfill, protection of minorities, and maintaining civil relations with their neighbors, not embarking on hostile actions towards their neighbors by joining military alliances. But that minimum has not been fulfilled. We are not obligated any longer to accept the agreements of 1991. All right, that's my position. What do you think, Peter?
But they did accept it. Okay, de facto that they did. And we have to tread carefully here, George, is that I think if you take your reasoning to the extreme, it's just like we should rebuild the Soviet Union.
Not necessarily, but that could be. That I agree, that could be. But all one has to do in this stage is, I mean, just to say at that point, is we don't accept those agreements. We need to renegotiate new sovereign state relationships. That's
well,
it.
When the toothpaste is out of the tube, it's difficult to put it back in, okay? Because Russia has diplomatic relations with these countries. They are members of the United Nations. I can't see how you undo this, okay? But I agree with you. I agree with you because the three presidents signing a document that had no legal, wasn't valid in any way, sense, or form under any law, even international law, didn't take into consideration future security concerns. And that goes back to Putin's famous speech, you know, the most catastrophic event of the 20th century, okay? Because too many Russians were left on the outside, okay? Now, I think the Chinese ambassador's point is very theoretical, it's very legal. I think it's a very interesting observation, but 30 years of facts on the ground have changed that, okay? And because of the illegal act that was committed in breaking up the Soviet Union, we have what we have today in Ukraine.
Well, but let me then bring up an example that you like to cite, which is the incorporation of the Baltic states within the USSR from 1945 to 1991, which is namely that the United States and the Western powers never accepted it as a part of the USSR, though de facto they did accept it. So you can accept things de facto, but then you reserve the right then to say, well, we don't really accept it at all. And then again, you have all sorts of ways. Look, countries have diplomatic relations with Israel, and Israel is continually trying to make facts on the ground, but no one actually accepts that these are Israel's final borders. So, they maintain good relations with Israel, but all the things that Israel does, whether it's settlements, whether it's moving its, claiming Jerusalem to be its capital, whether it's annexing the Golan Heights, and none of that is accepted by the countries that maintain diplomatic relations with Israel. So again, Russia could say, we just don't accept all kinds of things. We don't accept these borders. You had no right to declare these to be your borders by obvious definition. Okay, as a republic of the USSR, you have no right to declare that these are to be your borders. Your borders with other republics were determined by the USSR Constitution. You cannot unilaterally say, we are now independent, these are our international borders. They are not your borders to be declared international.
But the internet, I hate using the term international community, but recognized international law recognizes these borders right now. Russia recognizes these borders right now, okay?
Well, not anymore, they don't. They don't accept Ukraine's
borders.
Well,
actually, I mean, look at the thought process, flawed thought process of the Donbass from 2014 to February of last year. Russia continued to recognize them as being, those two republics as being part of Ukraine, internationally recognized.
Right, but not anymore.
Well, not anymore because Russia's security, its claim was it was under threat and it had to act, and it telegraphed that to the entire world repeatedly, over and over and over again.
But it's also, but it has, Putin explicitly said it wasn't just a matter of security. They said that these borders have no legal basis. They were simply created by the Bolsheviks. They stuffed all these provinces into one country and then declared to be these are the republics. They said there's no reason at all for us to accept this. And then just because you accepted it for a while, 30 years is nothing, it doesn't mean that you need to continue to accept this, because you can say, the fact is, none of the procedures that should have been followed were followed, particularly on the issue of the protection of Russian minorities, which is the most important thing. If you're going to go your own way, you have to be able to guarantee that your substantial minorities will be protected. Now, the same thing goes with the Baltic states. I mean, the Baltic states, Russia in it, but if you're not even going to bother to protect 30% of your population, then what's your standing in international law? And you can cite all manner of things, human rights declarations and General Assembly declaration, all the things that you're supposed to fulfill in protecting minorities. These countries have not done the minimum in fulfilling. So
Absolutely.
therefore, it's very unpleasant, but you can say, I'm sorry, but you just don't have any standing in international law.
Yes, but in multiple fora, international agreements, debt restructuring, Russia has made it very clear that it is the successor state of the Soviet Union. Okay, so and so it is drawn a line. Now, circumstances. Look, you have the three Baltic states. They joined the European Union. They're members of the United Nations, and there are obligations that they must undertake to protect minorities. Okay, they're the EU is that's part of their values. Okay, but they don't do it now. The question is what to do as a result. Okay, should Russia say to the Baltic republics, we no longer respect your and acknowledge your independence? Okay, yes. And they're going to say no. And of course, NATO is an element of right there. And Russia say no, we're going to protect our minority there. I'm not particularly sure even the minority in the Baltic republics want Russia to go to war with those countries.
No, I agree with you. I mean, you don't necessarily have to go to war. Maybe you can just say we don't recognize the Declaration of Independence. That's it. We just don't recognize it, and we reserve the right to at some point act upon this. We're not going to do it tomorrow, not even next week or next year, but we reserve the right to act in accordance to our interests and in accordance with our understanding of international law, which is that you are in violation of international law. You are not a sovereign state. You have not fulfilled any of the conditions that you are supposed to fulfill as a sovereign state. We just don't recognize you. Now, I mean, I don't see, given everything that the West has done towards Russia, I don't quite see why this is so beyond the pale. I mean, it seems that, it's the kind of thing that the West would do, incidentally, had the shoe been on the other foot. Boom, we don't hesitate. We don't recognize it. Sorry. It's just in this case, it's in the West's interest to maintain, to recognize the breakup of the USSR along those borders. Oh my God, we can't possibly call any of this into question. But I'd say, yeah, we're calling it into question, and we just don't recognize you.
Yeah, well, it gets really, really sticky, because then what is Russia? What its borders are not defined. I don't think.
Maybe not. I mean, okay.
I don't think Russia wants to live in that kind of environment. Okay.
No, nobody does. But on the other hand, so far, Russia has been reactive to everything that the West has done. I mean, the West has been making this one thing after another, and Russia is continually reacting, still talking about their Western partners, Western colleagues, and whatever. How about make a change? Yeah, South Ossetia, Abkhazia. Yep, that's part of Russia. I mean, that's it. Georgia, which didn't even take part in officially didn't take part in the referendum, the 1991 referendum, but the South Ossetia and Abkhazia did, and they voted overwhelmingly to stay within the USSR. Why should we not recognize that? But we do recognize Georgia. Why? How does that work? Why should we recognize the fact that Georgia is outside the USSR, but not the South Ossetia and Abkhazia? Same goes with Transnistria. Again, Transnistria took part in the referendum, voted overwhelmingly to stay part of the USSR. Moldova, however, so why does Moldova have more standing than Transnistria?
Well, I mean, but then you have to take into account public opinion here, and there is no appetite for returning to the Soviet Union, just beyond the ideology, but just borders. There's no appetite, no interest in it whatsoever. With the important caveat, which you bring up often incorrectly, well, why are you immiserating our fellow Russians on your side of the border? I mean, you blockade the Donbass for 8 years. You lob mortar at it for 8 years. You killed children, destroyed schools, wouldn't let pensions be paid. You couldn't even get a document to bury somebody.
Right,
okay,
right.
And under those circumstances, then I will tend to agree with you.
Yeah.
Okay, but to say this, because all of these are conflict driven. South Ossetia, Abkhazia, even though there wasn't a military, it was conjoined with South Ossetia. But that was an outcome of that outcome was a military outcome. The Creek became a political fact. Okay, we're seeing that also in the Donbass right now. But I'm just very wary to say, it's kind of like saying this is ours, this is ours, this is ours, this is ours, and beware. That's not a good international environment to work.
No, it isn't an ideal international environment, but we are not in an ideal international environment. What we have seen is not only NATO expansion, NATO aggression through its arming of Ukraine, a direct threat to Russia, but that they haven't maintained even the minimum of international standards. I mean, the fact that these states have persecuted Russians, the NATO states looked on benignly and said all of this in violation of countless resolutions. I mean, it's a solid body of international human rights law, and the Russians patiently went along with this. Look, as you said, they were bombing the Donbass. That's it. So you have this 30 years, and it wasn't even 30 years, 91. So that's just a little more than 20 years. This is what you've done after 20 years. So you're killing your own people, whose one thing is that they're just speaking their own language. You're violating every kind of international accord, and then we have to go back. All right. What's your legal basis? What's the legal basis of your statehood? Well, your legal basis, it doesn't exist. It's a fiction. I mean,
you're actually getting what you want, and Ukraine is the test case. Okay, that is the test case that we're seeing right now, because. And I'm agreeing with you. What is it? Let's have Minsk III. No. We've done your gobbledygook now for too many years, and your legal nihilism and all of this. Okay, no. These people feel persecuted. You believe in self-determination. You want to join us? Yep. Okay, you're in. Right. Okay, right. And I have no problem with Russia doing that. Okay, because what has happened, the NATOization of Ukraine, the neoliberal colonization of Ukraine, has turned Ukraine into a failed state. Okay, now it's time for a new settlement. Okay, now I'm confining it to Ukraine. However, agreeing with you, and again in a different way, this sets the precedent for the settlement of Transnistria, for example. Okay, you saw what we did. What we believe that we were forced into a situation to show our cards. Okay, we essentially, this is the same case here. You know what we did in Ukraine, right. And now we're going to do it again. Up to you.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I mean, on the case of the Baltic states, again, I think the Baltic states, given how badly they've treated the Russians, I think their claim for independent statehood is dubious. They simply didn't follow any constitutional procedure. I mean, they just went ahead and declared independence. And remember, the West can just simply dissolve states just like that, boom, from one day to the next. Hey, that's it. We accept this, but we don't accept any further breakup until we do, as in the case of, I mean, when they broke up Yugoslavia, they said, oh well, what was that based on? The findings of Robert Badinter, the French Chief Justice, who just declared, okay, well, the borders of these republics will be international frontiers. Well, what's that based on? And then, of course, they turn around and said, yeah, except for Serbia, we'll still chop a piece of Serbia. So bang, they just don't care about any of these rules. And so therefore, we can say, okay, these states, they haven't existed that long. Yugoslavia had existed for 75 years, and they just overturned it just like that. Ukraine has existed for 30 years, and there's no reason to stick to it. The creation of Yugoslavia had more legal basis to it than the creation of Ukraine. Ukraine, that was just no legal basis for whatever.
The problem is for Russia is that, again, Stalin, the great cartographer, and we're going to live with that for so much longer, unfortunately, is that there are too many scattering of people here. Okay, now I agree with you. I don't think that Russia has any reason whatsoever to listen to a Western interpretation of international law. Sorry, that train left the station. It's gone. However, I think Russia should tread carefully and be careful what it wishes for, okay? Because when it certainly doesn't want to get embroiled into any kind of conflict with the Baltic states, okay? And like I said, I don't even think Russians living there, as oppressed as they are, they would be the cannon fodder for it, and they don't want to do that, okay? Right. Now, unfortunately, this question could be raised because now there's a really hard border. Okay, before all of this, there were legal borders going back and forth, no problem. Okay, that's different right now. Now it's creating the possibility, where it's saying, our oppression is so great where we can't have family ties right now. Our economic ties have been destroyed, and we're looking, because the legality of Lithuania, well, is questioned by some, okay? Right. Then you start down this process here. And that's why I think Russia should be very careful in what it does here. You're right. The West will, what minority can we find there to go after? Oh, yeah, right. Whoever they, doesn't matter, okay? Right. The gypsies, go. Back the gypsies. Right.
Okay? The West would not hesitate to break off chunks of Russia and declare, oh, this is Tatarstan, independent state. We recognize it. Well, what, Chechnya, George, we recognize it.
But George, mark my words. Someone in Washington right now is saying, this Chinese ambassador's ideas there. How can we work this angle? Even the Chinese. So if these post-Soviet republics that become independent, well, Russia is a post-Soviet republic.
Right. I absolutely. My feeling is always that what the Russians don't have, which they used to have in the Soviet era, is the ability to set an agenda. I mean, the Soviet Union would have this, they would set an agenda. I think Russia should set an agenda and say, we just simply no longer are bound by the 1991 agreements. That's all. Take it how you want it. And now, we're not saying we're going to invade or anything. We're just not bound by it. Those agreements are null and void. That too many things have happened. You violated too many basic tenets of international law. These states have no basis on any, there's no constitutional basis on anything. We're just not bound by them anymore. And we will act in accordance with our understanding of what's in our interest and what international law prescribes. Let NATO then make of that what it will. It'll cause a lot of panic, as this Chinese ambassador's comments, because I mean, remember, Chinese don't throw these things around. They're very cautious about the things they say. So very interesting for him to say this.
That's why it made the news, because you wouldn't expect something like that. George, to kind of to try to explain why this happened the way it did. Okay, I wasn't here when the Soviet Union collapsed, but I did live here during part of the 1990s. And I think there was this mindset that because the old system, the communist system, failed, collapsed, whatever term you want to use, expired, there was only one alternative, the West. And I think that was the mindset, and that was an incorrect assumption to make. There are other ways than just their default position. And you have to remember, everyone, and I'm not happy to say this, but there were plenty of people that thought, forget this, we'll embrace them. We'll be, maybe we won't be top dog, but I personally going to be rich, okay? And there was a huge betrayal in the 1990s. Yeltsin was the biggest betrayal. He was in the forest with the drunken presidents and signed this. Okay,
right.
Okay, and it's only because that other alternative, the West, that they're pretty hostile to us. They don't want us to join. We can't be part of it. Okay, even if you willingly want to be part of it. No, look, ask Oleg Deripaska. He did bent over backwards, tied himself into a pretzel to do whatever they wanted to do, and he's still sanctioned.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I think, of course, the weakness was said by Gorbachev, because what Gorbachev, when he began these negotiations in 1991 after the referendum, he already was very weak in doing so, because, you know, instead of basically saying these negotiations must involve all republics of the Soviet Union, he kind of accepted, oh, well, it'll be a kind of mini Soviet Union. He basically allowed the those republics who had boycotted the referendum just to boycott these negotiations. So in a way, the coup leaders who thought that actually you should have the whole thing, the whole of the USSR should be involved in crafting a new constitution and a new union. I mean, they were right. I mean, they bungled it. They bungled the coup, which of course was a disaster. But Gorbachev was very weak, and it's unfortunate that, and he was the prime example of the West is right. Stalin, Stalin, and all these terrible things that happened under communism and so on, without, looking at the context and everything else. So, so Yeltsin just simply added to the bungled weakness and incompetence of Gorbachev.
Yeah, I mean, it was Gorbachev's limited intelligence and incredibly naive politicking. Okay, maybe you were great at being an apparatchik, but when it came to being a political actor and political thinker, he was a zero, a big zero. He still is, okay? Yep. But Yeltsin, no, he was cunning. What he wanted was, how can he get power? Can he get power in the Soviet Union? Well, they got Gorbachev. How do you get rid of him? You can't. But maybe I can be king of the hill of Russia, okay? So let's get rid of the Soviet Union, okay? Right. I'll take Russia, okay? And again, going back to the very beginning here, is that, no one took the security interests of these peoples all through the Soviet Union, particularly ethnic Russians that would find themselves on the other side of the border. They should be condemned by history for what they did to their own people, because now we're seeing it today. And it's awful to see this happen, okay? And it shouldn't be a surprise, because the West saw this as like, divide and conquer, we got this one, we got it, okay? All around the Soviet Union.
All of that, because all of those issues, all of the issues, which is minorities, the frontiers, they have to be negotiated, because no republic can just simply unilaterally declare these are our international frontiers. Well, hey, your borders with another republic, they're not really up to you. They have to be decided by higher bodies, the Union of the Soviet Socialist Republics. I mean, you can't just simply decide what are your borders with your neighboring republics. So all of those issues, whether it's, as I say, minorities, how the economic burdens are going to be shared, there should be a matter of negotiation. There should be a matter of negotiation under law and what is constitutionally prescribed, not anything that was unilateral. And that's why, since this was done in such a chaotic, illegal manner, there's simply no reason to be bound by. If it worked, if you could say the first couple of decades, hey, this works, no, the hell with it. Let's just go with it. To hell with the law. It works. It doesn't work, and now, so therefore, the issue of the law does now matter.
Well, I can't verify if this was true, but I've been told by people that were close to the events of the breaking up of the Soviet Union, is that Yeltsin was asked, well, what about Crimea? And it was, keep it, whatever. It's like, I don't know if that story is true, but it shows that how negligent these people were, and not really understanding what they were doing and what kind of a train of events that would go on for decade after decade after decade. So I don't know if that story is true, but the sense of it does make sense to me. They were not interested in they were interested in creating fiefdoms for themselves, power struggles against their rivals. They thought about a lot of things, but not about the security of the Russian people.
Right. That's exactly right. And you're right. I mean, Gorbachev was just simply weak and incompetent. Yeltsin was a malevolent figure, because he actively strove to destroy this state, because he's going to do well out of this. Hey, I've got Russia. That's the big prize. And he was ready to sell out completely to the United States. I mean, he was just going to, hey, take whatever you want. I mean, it's all yours.
Just let me go to Wimbledon.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, at least Gorbachev had some ideas about moving towards social democracy or whatever it was that he was thinking. Yeltsin didn't care about that. Just say, take it.
what the Chinese ambassador, France, said it's deep. It's very deep, and it has so many different implications. Just as you and I are just spitballing right here. We didn't pre-prepare this, okay? Exactly. But what he is suggesting is that the West has no interest in international law whatsoever, and it uses the international law to further its security and economic and financial interests. What the Chinese ambassador is also saying is that, well, China, Russia, and other countries can do the same.
Yeah, I think so. And I think he's saying, which absolutely needs to be said, is that unilateral secessions have no standing. And it doesn't matter if in the end they said, oh, okay, well, we kind of accept it. If a unilateral secession has taken place in violation of the law and constitution, domestic law, international law, constitutional law, if it's done all of that, then there's really no reason to accept it. I mean, you can't just simply say everything according to de facto. Oh, well, we accept it, therefore that's all there is to it. No, I mean, there are just too many violations. And since it isn't working, and the world is becoming more and more unstable, just as anyone could have predicted that this will happen when in the aftermath of this chaotic breakup, that this is becoming a very dangerous situation, then you have to rethink it and start applying law to it. Because China's also thinking, look, it's a big country, it could easily break up. They've had problems with fiefdoms and warlords and everything else. And they know exactly what the West has in mind for China. That's exactly what we intend to do to you. So that's why I said, we're not going to accept unilateral secessions.
Well, you picked up, brought up a point that one of my favorite points about the living as if with the Baltic republics. Yes, during the Cold War, the West did not recognize the Baltic republics as being part of the Soviet Union, but they lived as if it were. Okay, now what Russia wants to do with this kind of thinking that you and I have been discussing here, they have to be able to communicate to the world how they understand this issue, because if it's unclear and murky and all that, then it can create instability, and that's not good for anybody. It's not good for Russia here. No. But to essentially agree with your point, because I think this is really fascinating, is that Russia has to make clear is that you made all these deals. You said it was all based on international law. We simply don't recognize that. So be aware. Now, I think Russia has good statecraft. It has very good diplomatic efforts, and it has to be able to communicate that. Okay, and as an example, Transnistria. Okay, it's not done and dusted. Okay, this is still an issue that's open, and in light of the West's behavior vis-a-vis Ukraine and NATO expansion, well, we're going to reshuffle the deck now. We're not, we're not going to listen to your ideas anymore. We've had enough of that. You're going to start listening to our ideas.
That's right. That I think is why it's important. They should in fact say exactly that. Look, we go back to the fundamental documents. What actually is the law. You want to just say that, oh, well, the breakup in 1991, that's it. That's done, and so it's now sacrosanct. Everything that happened in 1991. Well, no, because there were more important things that happened in 1991. The referendum. We had a referendum. People took part in the referendum. It was 80%, an overwhelming majority. Overwhelming said we want to maintain the state. How come we don't have the state anymore? If 80% say we want the state, and then a few months later we don't have that state anymore, then the will of the people has been violated.
And three individuals that, with what power did they have to do that?
Yes, and that was a real referendum. That was it was mandated, a legislative mandated, and was a binding referendum. This wasn't a consultative referendum. It was a serious referendum. It was ignored, and the question is, well, the West wants to recognize things that were illegal, like Ukraine's referendum in the aftermath of the August coup, which has no legal standing, and of course the Belovezh Accords, there's absolutely no legal standing. Why should we accept these? That's what the West wants to accept. We don't accept them. They have no legal standing.
Yeah, well, the West doesn't respect the referenda that were in Crimea.
Exactly.
They respect other ones.
They accept other referendums. Exactly. Well, with this referendum, we'll accept. Every time they have a referendum in Transnistria, no, we don't recognize it. Oh, yeah.
Well, this is a very interesting question. George and I have touched on this in the past. We've never really gone deep into it head on. But this is something that's very, very important. The Chinese will surprise you. They're very you know, because I like to make fun of Western elites because they're incompetent. Chinese are very serious people. You don't always have to like what they're serious about, okay? But they're very serious people, and it's an interesting foil to the West, where it's Monday, I think this way, on Tuesday, I think this way. My interest is this, and it's so fluid. See, international law in the West is super fluid, okay? Yeah. And the Chinese are saying, well, if you have a longer look, which they're good at doing, George, they have a habit of looking way back.
Yes, yeah.
There are inconsistencies in the way the West behaves. That's true.
Yeah, very much so. And, you know, people are getting fed up with it. It's sort of, you know, you make all these kind of little rules, you know, always what's in your interest. And then you have the insolence to say, well, we are for the rules-based order, you know, the rules that we set, and then we change whenever they don't suit us. And you know, long term, it's not that long. Look, 30 years ago, it broke up. Look, I mean, I remember it very clearly, so it's not that long ago. So it's not like, oh, it's 100 years ago. We can't really go back and revisit things that happened 100 years. No, you know, it's within the living memory of many, many people.
Well, the dissolution of the Soviet. I was in Budapest. I was living in the Buda Hills when it happened. I remember very clearly. Not that long ago. George and I are not that old.
Not that exactly. Remember it. So it's absolutely. And given these people, the Baltic states, who have been behaving so abysmally for so long in such a nasty, malevolent way, I think it's high time to bring up the subject. No, we don't accept this. You violated all these international norms, which is what the norms that you have to fulfill in order for independent statehood. That's what international law prescribes. Sorry, we just don't accept any longer your independence. Make of that what you will, but we don't accept your independence.
Yeah, well, Russia was on the receiving end for a long time because of the proxy war that the West is waging against Russia and Ukraine. Things are going to change. They have changed.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, everybody. This is Peter and George. We are the Gaggle. We're on Local, so please go to thegaggle.locals.com. Please visit our store. And since it is Sunday, your waiting period to George's live stream is just that short.
Exactly. Just little more than 48 hours. It will be time for my live stream, 3 p.m. on Eastern time on Tuesday. Come with comments, criticisms, and suggestions. Think about little buddy, because as we know, he is a very litigious person. He's going back to the fundamental documents that established the tip jar, and he's not happy with the violations of the
eating ice.
Exactly. So we don't want him to start rethinking all these documents. So if you have a few bob in your pocket, whip them out, dunk them in his tip jar. That'll keep him calm for a little while. We're very grateful for all of your help and friendship and support. The more you're able to donate, the more of these videos we can make, the more we can improve the technology, and above all, the more we can keep Buddy away from these documents. He's become quite document obsessed. So remember, if you like the Gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye.